Inspired by stories told during the researching of the book Thorpe Thewles of Grindon Parish, A History, this DVD sets out to convey some of these stories as captured on video. Interviews with local people reveal much more about the history of the village and surrounding area during the 20th century than was ever expected, providing an interesting series of snapshots of this time. The first school, the Thorpe Church of England School, was provided by Frances Anne, Marchioness of Londonderry in 1844. The school was located on the site of the first two manor cottages. The second school, Grindon Church School, was built in 1899 on Durham Road, on land donated by the 9th Viscount Boyne, MP for Durham, to accommodate 98 children. It had 2 classrooms, an office, a playground, and outside toilets. It is still here in 2008, but altered into a lovely family home. It is often said that school days are the happiest days of your life, but for one small boy in the 1940s, this was not the case.
I hated it. That was the worst part of my life. As a little boy, I reckon there was 2 lady teachers. I'm sure they'll be dead, so I dare say it. And I think they hated me, or I hated them.
2 main classes. It was divided into 2 rooms. The smaller one was for the infants, and then you moved into the bigger one.
There were 2 classes, and one was Mrs. Boyce. She was like the headmistress. There was only 2 school teachers, and Miss Thompson.
And then we got a headmaster after that, Mr. Lister.
During the war, the school was used for meetings of the Home Guard, and some pupils remembered the school air raid shelter and when the iron railings were taken down.
The school had iron rails around them once, you know. Cut them down to melt it down, you know.
The local vicar, Reverend May, went into the Royal Air Force in 1939, so the vicarage garden, now a luxury housing development, was tended by the children from the school, who also had gardening plots where the playing field is now.
We had a school garden, and everybody, maybe 2 of you would have a plot each, only small like, and you're sowing, got your seeds and you're sowing your seeds there, yeah. Yeah, but they definitely had around the vicarage as well.
After the war, the army vacated Lord Londonderry's Wynyard Hall.
He opened his place out as a training college.
As a measure to alleviate the shortage of teachers. This also provided work for Lance Faraday's taxi service.
My auntie and uncle, it was only a 1-car taxi service. They didn't have a fleet of them. And he used to get calls from them to go and pick them up and bring them into the village.
In the 1930s, the Reverend Sharpley, Vicar of St James, had obtained permission for the school to use the parish hall field, which was situated where St James Close is today. It was used by the village until the houses were built in 1980.
The school was a schoolyard. Outside the school gates and across the road was what they called the parish hall field, and that was the field that was used only really for sports.
Have school sports there, play cricket there, you know, play football there.
From September 1958, all children went from Grindon School to Billingham Campus School, but those who passed the scholarship went to Grangefield Grammar School.
Well, if they didn't pass their scholarship, they left about 13.
By 1967, with falling pupil numbers, and despite appealing for money through the Buy a Brick scheme, the school was closed on December the 22nd that year, and the story shown on Tyne-Tees television.
It closed the Christmas, and we were given a fortnight's notice when it closed. But there'd only be about 30 children, maximum 30 children. There was John Ison was headmaster, and there was Margaret Smith, who had the little ones.
The children of Thorpe Thewles now attend William Cassidy Church of England School in Stillington, named after the Reverend Cassidy, founder of Grindon School. Many have also chosen to attend local private schools. Attractively set at the entrance to Thorpe Thewles from the A177 is St James's Church, a small Victorian building dating from 1887. It is surrounded by a beautiful country churchyard. For villagers, the church provides a place for regular services and also for the celebration of special events.
I never ever passed church that, you know, I couldn't, if I'm in the bus and that, I always have to have a good look, you know, to see everything's all right.
What feelings do you get when you go in?
Peace. I don't know, it just overwhelms you, I think, when you go in, whether you're going for a wedding, a funeral, carol service. I really feel when I go into church.
At baptism, families celebrate the birth of their new baby. It also marks their desire for their child to be brought up within the life of the church community. Later at confirmation, children become adult members of the church by taking the vows made at baptism for themselves. Many villages have wonderful memories of their wedding day. Fashions have changed, as has the form of words used in the service, but the hopes of the bride and groom and their families that they will enjoy a happy and fulfilling life together remain unchanged.
I was married on the 19th of August 1972. Gosh, he wore just a pale blue suit with a jazzy tie, and he had long hair, and Lena made my wedding dress, and it was like the princess line collar, like daisies underneath here. It had long sleeves and a big long train. I had red roses and white carnations. Margaret was a bridesmaid, and it was in like a peacock blue, and the little one was in like a sea green.
In Thorpe, the fashion was, until recently, that the lich gate would be tied to prevent the bridal party leaving until the bridegroom had thrown handfuls of money for village children to collect.
Oh, well, they had to wait there, you see, till they throw the money.
You know, everybody was clamouring to see how much money we could pick up, as we did when we were kids. Oh, if there was a wedding, it was wonderful.
Harry Bensley devised a new tradition.
Harry Bensley. Well, him with a rope. Well, every time there was a wedding, you see, he used to block the road and have this rope across, you see. And then before people could go into the church, they had to throw some coppers out for him.
For many people, funerals have taken place in the church. Having been laid to rest in the churchyard, their place in the history of the village has been marked by a gravestone.
So obviously it's got memories of the church for me because both my parents are buried there.
Inside the church is the village war memorial, commemorating those from the parish who fell in both world wars. Many people remember with affection the annual services that take place in the church. The social opportunities associated with them, such as decorating the church together, carol singing around the village, and the harvest supper, are also treasured memories.
I think the earliest vivid memory I have is on a Christmas morning, and I had a little Christmas bear that I'd opened, and just sitting in church listening to, I think it was Malcolm at the time, sort of giving a sermon and just thinking, well, you know, I want to get back and open my present. So I remember going to Easter services, and we always used to get a sort of chocolate egg at the, so there always used to be a harvest festival, and used to bring sort of carrots and all that kind of thing and decorate the church around there. I do remember spring cleaning the church and rubbing brasses with Joan, and just sort of tidying up the garden and everything. Sort of carol singing around the village, which I really remember very well when we were very young. We used to go around to Mary Cartwright's and have a big sort of supper, and I presume the adults had alcohol, but we had sort of hot juice and things, so that was great. It was a really big event.
The summer garden party at the old vicarage has always been a highlight of the year, not least for the children.
There was always one of the Londonderries that used to come down and open it. I remember one year Lady Jane came down. She was very nervous about doing it, but she came down, she was lovely, and she was only a young girl, but the Londonderries always supported, they always sent money and all sorts of things. You know.
They used to enjoy the summer fetes. Church fetes, they were good. As the children then were involved, they used to have they used to dance and have fancy dress parades, and I mean nearly everybody in the village used to go. It was lovely.
The centenary of the church. Oh, we had a wonderful flower festival. We had all these gorgeous flowers that came in, and everybody in the village did something. We even had a coffin in the church, and it was from birth to death, and it was a coffin lid, and it was laid in the chancel, and it was the flowers that were on the top of it that looked lovely. And we had the wedding, and we had two hoops that we did as two wedding rings and doves on the top.
Village children also sing in the church choir, which involved going to choir practice as well as 2 services on a Sunday.
And then on a Sunday, we used to go to church morning and evening and Sunday school. I was in the choir.
Oh, were you?
I got a bony finger in my back.
What from?
Mrs. James.
Sunday school.
There was quite a few at one point. I think when we were in the choir, when we were about 9, 10, something like that, we used to have Friday night choir practice, where we used to have to bring the surplus home to wash, and we played ghosts with that all the way around the village.
Sarah remembers the kindness of older members of the church to her and her sister. Having grown up, it is clear that this has developed into a mutual caring relationship.
Les was very active as church warden, and Leela, Doreen and Elsie Waterston, and Joan, who was very active as well. And Norman was a big part of the church. He was one of the church wardens, and he sort of seemed to do more of the kind of gardening and hands-on things. And Les used to sing and be serving at the altar.
But Norman and I used to go up every Saturday morning, and Norman used to hoover and I used to dust. Then if we had any things on at the church, I would help in the church baking and things like that. When we had the summer fairs, and we used to have it in Studholme's barns, I was generally on the tea.
Lena Dixon speaks fondly of Miss Usher, a church member who left a legacy of memories both as a dedicated member of the church and the village. She devoted hours caring for the church she loved, and she organised many of the activities that took place in the village, including outings and the choral society.
She was a lovely woman, and she used to come with me when I went out for a walk with the dog, and she sang all the way around, you know, not singing, but she hummed and, you know, all the way around, you know. She was good. She was one of her on her own, you know.
So how old would she have been when you...
I've no idea. Do you know, I was talking to
Yes.
Margaret about it, and I said, I can't think how old she was, you know, because she always seemed to be old.
Every vicar is remembered for their work in the village. However, some vicars or their wives have provided unusual memories.
I remember the old, when I first came here, we had Penniman Worsley.
Yes.
And my mother used to say, I've never seen anybody like it, because he was very tall and thin. And he used to walk around in this black surplice right down to the ground. Face was white and never smiled or anything.
Mrs. Penniman Worsley started a children's ballet class.
We did Swan Lake in the parish hall.
Wonderful.
And we did it all, you know, we just did all the dances. I was a signet with Valerie Harrison.
She was very good with the children, worked really hard. I mean, she had all sorts going for the children. The ballet and all this sort of thing, you know, she did all sorts really with the kids. There was 2 lads used to come down from Red Marshall Station, and they used to join in the dancing and all, yeah.
A touring group of mummers, traditional folk players, were invited to perform in the village by the Reverend Bill Hall.
Oh, they were wonderful. They lived in the parish hall. How on earth they managed, I have no idea, because there were children. And we got quite friendly with one of the chaps that belonged in Cumbria. It was all done by the vicar who was chaplain to the arts, which was the Reverend Bill Hall, and had a hog roast in front of the vein arms. They dressed the fireplace with ferns and all kinds of things, you know, and we had a lovely night, like walking through the village and dressed up. And they would come into your house and perform a play if you wished. You see, mind you, there was straw and everything all over by the time they went out. They camped down in the parish hall, you see. I mean, we all chipped in and brought meals around for them, or if you made a hot pot or something like that, you brought it around for them.
To many people in the village, it is clear that St James's Church is held in great affection. More than just a building, it holds precious memories for them. Their hope is that it will continue to provide similar memories for future generations.
The altar, because the altar's just, I just think it's beautiful.
Yes, because I think it's a lovely church.
It makes you sort of feel also that you're part of something bigger. You know, it gives you a much bigger meaning to your life. You know, it's not just you're here, you live, you die, you turn to dust. It's about a greater sense of worth, and also that, you know, there is God up there looking out for us all. It's to do with forgiveness, how you treat others. It just gives you, I feel as a person, it makes me much richer and better and you know, a much nicer person and able to deal with people in a much more forgiving manner.
We need the church, and it would be dreadful if it closed.
As with most villages, there are many characters and traditions in Thorpe Thewles.
Christmas, you have a Father Christmas gives presents to all the children in the village.
Norman, because he was Father Christmas for a while, wasn't he, Norman Alderson?
Yes, he did it for a lot of years. He took over from George Stoddard when George Stoddard died, you know, he took over, and he made a good Father Christmas.
Lena made his first costume.
He used to use the one that I made first of all, you know. I think they've had another one since then.
And the other thing that Kevin and I did, we got the first Christmas tree in the village. Another lad in the village that was working in the forestry got us a tree. And this tree came, I'm telling you, it was a whacking great tree. Must have been about 40 foot tall, this tree. We put it in near the Vane Arms. We erected it there, dug the hole, got it in, you know, put the lights up and all the rest of it. Yeah.
A permanent Christmas tree was planted in November 2007 and carols were sung around it, accompanied by Merton Brass Band. There are many stories associated with the public houses in the village. Stables at both public houses are a testament to earlier use of staging posts. The Vane Arms cellar has allegedly been used as a mortuary.
And he said, and where did they used to keep the dead people before the funeral parlours and things? I said, I don't know. He said, in the Vane Arms cellar, because it was the only cold place to keep them until they got buried.
The Vane Arms has been visited by several celebrities. Music hall star Sir Harry Lauder, and in November 1998, Russian cosmonaut Alexander Volkov and ballistics expert Alexander Martinov.
Harry Lauder came through the village. My grandfather was in the Vane Arms, and Harry Lauder stopped his car, went in and bought a drink for everybody in the pub. My grandfather tells that story. Very early, perhaps before the 20s, a man would bite off a rat's head in the Hamilton Russell Arms for free drinks.
One tale of the Vane Arms is a character with no hands, who's quite a good darts player, sitting in his special seat opposite the board, helped by his teammates. He would blow modified darts from his mouth with great accuracy. Legend has it that many years ago the name Dead Man's Corner arose after a person occupying the bench in the corner of the Vane Arms died there.
A chap from up the station, Thorpe Station, he used to have a pony in a flat cart. When he used to get drunk, the pony in the flat cart used to take him home.
As night and consumption of beer went on, his flat cap would slide further and further down the side of his head, but it never fell off.
One night he was that drunk, so they took him home and they dismantled the cart outside and put it in the living room and put it back together again and put the horse in, and when he got up the next morning he wondered how the hell his horse and cart was in the living room.
It is reputed that there is a ghost in the Vane Arms.
Gail's mum seen it, had red eyes. Sandra Hannah, she's seen a figure.
There's also a rumour that there was a third public house in the village.
There was a third pub in the village. What we used to call Pop Usher's bungalow. At the front there, if you look, there's like a big trapdoor thing that opens out. He said, and that's where the beer used to go down.
The gardening club was conceived while residents were visiting the public house.
Well, we were in the pub one day in Vane one day, and there was Peter McLaren, there was myself, there was Norman Wilkinson, and maybe there's one or two others. And we just got, talking about we should do something for the village, have a village show, which I don't think we'd ever had. So the seed was sown in about 1985.
Like most villages, Thorpe Thewles has had its share of colourful characters.
Witch Meg?
Yeah. No. Stories told by parents to frighten naughty children about the witch Meg Addison getting them if they were bad.
No, I was never bad. No, I was never a naughty boy. No, I don't remember that.
In the early 20th century, a local tramp would announce his presence in a most unusual way.
Remember Tarzan? Yes. He was, I would think, in his late 50s or 60s. And he came into the village when I was there perhaps 2 or 3 times. He would wander into the village and he'd go and stand in the centre and he'd holler like Tarzan of the films. Now this was to get the kids out, you see, and the kids loved him. And they would gather round him and then they would go home and they would catch tea and sugar, and I think some women would make sandwiches for him. And then he would wander off again. But he always had a raincoat and he had a haversack over his shoulder. But we liked him.
Sadly, it is said that he was found dead in a ditch just outside of the village a few years later.
Pop McLaren used to always organise a maypole dance, like a village fete, and Pop always made sure that got the kids out and they danced around the maypole and so on.
Now, there was a chap called Mr. Merriweather who used to live at Sunset Cottage. He was blind, and he used to come up you could set your clock, 9 o'clock, and you'd hear his stick, and he would come in. He always had a pork pie and maybe just 1 or 2 other bits. And twice a year he used to bring his talking clock up to have the time adjusted for summertime. Albert Smith, who lived in North Close, the very first week we were here, and he came in and he bought some ice cream, said he was going to the pub. I said, well, just leave it, you know, leave it in the freezer until you be at the pub, have your pint, you go home. No, I'm not going to. We closed at 5, went outside and followed the trail of Raspberry Ripple from in front of the bar in the Hammy. You could follow it across to the Vane Arms and across to the North Coast. There's Lena Dixon and Dorian who keep me supplied in courgettes and tomatoes. We've met some really nice people in Thorpe.
We see evidence around the village of the 9th Viscount Boyne, Gustavus William Hamilton Russell. He bought Blakeston Hall in 1800. It was Viscount Boyne, MP for Durham, who gave the land to build the school in 1899 and the parish hall in 1923, but to this day he retains the mineral rights. The indenture dated the 31st of December 1923, signing over the land, conveys, unto the trustees, who are the local vicar and the chairman of the parish council, a piece of land containing 2,550 square feet.
Remember that it is a self-funding hall, so over the years we've always had to have either 2 or 3 fundraising events to keep it going.
The vicar was ex officio trustee of the village hall, yeah. When Malcolm Goodall was vicar, and he got Ted Woodward and Kevin Williams and I involved in trying to fundraise to keep it going, and I used to do a 100 club. You know,
one of the privileges of being chairman of the parish council is that you're also a trustee of the parish hall, and that is, as I understand it, is still the case along with the vicar.
Now we seem to, I do the bookings, a bit of the secretarial work. There's not a lot of secretarial work to do, and the cleaning as well. Brenda, Alison and myself do it between us.
The indenture also states that trustees and survivors of them are to permit the parish hall to be used as a non-political place of recreation and social intercourse. And what a variety of activities there have been.
There was lots of things on in the village hall all the time. There used to be dances on regular. The dances were like, my father would run one maybe for the Oddfellows Club, towards funds and other things like that. And whist drives, my mother went to the whist drives every week. They had meetings there and socials, and of course my father used to talk about it and make a fuss, and my mother would sometimes do some cooking ready for him to bring the food down with a horse and cart. Sometimes he used the village hall because of having these social meetings, and sometimes he used to have dances in aid of it and things. Oh yeah, we went when I was a kid. Every year there was a village Christmas party in the village hall. We lived in between the 2 villages. We were lucky, we went to Carlton's party and Thorpe's party. We used to have a party alone because as I said, we were like a village in the middle.
Coral Society, and
I remember Mr Williams and son David and Miss Usher. Well, they had quite a good thing going then. Mum enjoyed playing for them.
We used to have concert parties for the school. I remember...
Dancers?
Yeah, dancers in there. I remember we had a Boy Scout and a Girl Guide group, or groups, in the village. And I was in the Peewit patrol. And I remember the vicar used to be like the scoutmaster, and he used to take us on like camping expeditions and that in tents. And I can remember Mum used to play the piano. She taught self-taught. She taught herself to play the piano, but she used to go up and play at the local hops, the dances, and she'd be sat there playing the piano. And then later on, there was my cousin came along, and he could play the drums. And there was a Mrs Campion used to have the piano. She had this little group. I don't know whether it was somebody on a guitar or what, but there was about 3 or 4 of them, and they used to come up and play at the dances.
We had a church youth club. There was the WY, there was Thorpe Ladies Group, there was the garden club. We had a yoga, and we had 2 badminton clubs.
Thorpe Thewles actually had a very good badminton team.
At one time there was whist drives every month.
First Monday, just through the winter months. It was called progressive. 2 playing against 2. The 2 losers, 1 moved round, so they didn't play together the next time.
We always had a dance on New Year, you know, and I know one of the chaps that he says, "Well, I had a bloody good time last night," and he was carried home at 11 o'clock and put to bed because he was stone drunk.
Yeah.
The indenture also states that the trustees may from time to time permit the buildings to be repaired, altered, enlarged or taken down and rebuilt if necessary. The major refurbishment in the 1980s saved the parish hall from closure.
The place really looked an absolute eyesore. I thought, well, what are we going to do with it? You know, we can't leave it. We can't let it deteriorate any further, otherwise it's going to fall down around our ears. And we were reaching the point where we either closed it completely or we had to refurbish it completely. There was no third alternative.
Hall, we only had 1 toilet, for instance. And so when the project was put on the map, it was actually funded by the parish hall and the parish council.
A small builder who built the kitchen extension.
And so the first thing we had to do was remove windows at both the east and the west side. These were windows. These had to be taken out. There was a fireplace in that alcove. That had to come out. Built on was the storeroom, which incorporated 2 lots of toilets, including a disabled toilet. And of course this involved building work, flooring, drains, electricity, everything. It was a complete refurbishment, but the work itself, I mean, after the builders had finished, there was an awful lot of smaller jobs. I say smaller jobs, there was plastering, there was joinery, there was all sorts of things, and these were undertaken by Kevin and Ron Kay.
We stripped all the plaster off the walls, and I built the arches, you know, that you still see now.
And we've got to remember that these people, including the ones that came in from the various organisations that were using the hall and all helped with the painting and decorating, they were all full-time workers. So this work had to be done in the evenings and on a weekend.
Brian Fairs night. A lot of people helped to refurbish it, but I remember one Sunday morning, Brian and I emulsioning the wall.
I know my husband helped polish the floor.
Yeah.
Some of our, including myself, ladies, we did the washing of the floors and did the little menial tasks. And the curtains were purchased by the Thorpe Ladies Group. And the kitchen was, the flooring and the units that were put in at the time were given by Pat and Ken Hudson.
The parish hall has also been a regular meeting place for many organisations, including our local parish council, the parochial church council, Mothers Union and the Women's Institute, which met in the hall for over 50 years.
In the WI, it was fantastic. And we did all sorts of things. And we learnt lots of crafts. And we did calico doll making. And we did Hessian doll making. We did all sorts of doll making. Teddy bears. I think it's only fair to say that all the crafts that I do, I've learnt from WI.
It was Norman Alderton, and he was having badminton. And I think I've enjoyed mostly the annual autumn show that we always had in the hall, which was absolutely wonderful.
It got to be quite a big show actually. It was, it was on Saturday in September, first Saturday in September. That's when it was, and we did. We got the kids to do a little miniature garden.
The garden produce, the cakes, and the children from the school doing the paintings, etc. It was really wonderful. And then we had the annual Christmas meal, which we always did. Mrs. Jewell providing all these wonderful Christmas puddings.
In 2008, the parish hall continues the tradition started by its forebears as a hub of village life, where villagers maintain it, clean it, learn new skills, have regular meetings and enjoy themselves. The managers and trustees leave the hall in an excellent state to continue this tradition. In all rural areas such as Thorpe Thewles, over the last century, the village post office has played a major role in communicating with outside agencies. As a centre of the community, it's a place where residents share information.
I gather the post office is being located next to the Vane Arms.
It's been at the house next door to the shop, as it is now.
At the cottage, and also at Brooklyn on Bank Terrace.
John Woodward's house, it used to be a post office in there. Mrs. Goodman used to have the post office then.
I keep trying to remember her name and I can't.
Mrs. Bottomley?
Mrs. Bottomley, that's right, yes.
Right. She got a little shop, and at some stage the post office.
Oh, as a kid, you was a lady you didn't take to. She was very sharp and everything like that. But I would think, as all these ladies were, they were all very motherly and looked after your interests. Right?
But at that stage she moved up to Vaux Cottages, which was owned by Vaux Breweries. And the front room was altered into a shop and the post office eventually.
Next door to the pub. Well, there was just 2 square gardens at the front with no hedge. I don't think, if I remember, there was any hedge at the back towards the house. And you walked in the front of there to go into the shop. I went in, what I remember of going in as a kid is the counter was so high I could never see over it.
Mr. and Mrs. Elliott ran the post office for many years.
Now wait a minute, we've been out about 19 years now and we're in just over 12. Like 31 years ago, isn't it? So it would be round about 1976, 77.
The most recent owner is Mr. R. Smith.
Yeah, we opened 8 till 8 and we were open 7 days a week when I first came in. It was the 19th of July 1989 and we built the trade up, and then of course they opened the supermarket up and we lost 60% of our trade overnight.
Regrettably, the post office was closed in July 2008 as part of a national cost-cutting policy. The impact on the community life is still to be assessed.
Well, I will miss it because obviously if you forget stamps and if you need a recorded delivery and things like that, I mean, what are you going to do for that?
I begin to worry about where especially older people are going to get, the bit of bread or their, tins of soup or their pension. So I'm sad.
Bob, you're very helpful man. He's been brilliant to me, as Bob, he really has.
The doctors leave prescriptions here for people who can't get up in, the bus services, right? And as a kind of modernisation now, I've got 4 or 5 of me old ladies who bring their prescriptions and I email them through to the surgery. And then the doctor drops them off and they pick them up.
So that'll all go then?
That'll all go, yeah.
Sadly, we've experienced the end of an era. Due to its rural location, Thorpe Thewles has always been and will continue to be associated with farming.
In those days, we knew them as, there was Swinbanks Farm, which is the one up near the Hamilton Russell Arms. There was McLaren's Farm, which is the Vane Arms. Down here was called Goldsborough's Farm, and the one over the road was Parker's Farm. So there were 4 farms. The one that we used to get our milk from was Swinbanks Farm, and I can remember we used to go around with a jug or a can and say, could I have a pint of milk please?
When I first started farming, there was more livestock than the arable side. The farm used to have roughly about 200 head of cattle on, about 100 sheep, and we ran a 20 sow breeding herd of pigs. Well, now we're mainly arable, so we're growing wheat, barley, oilseed rape and beans. We fatten 1,700 pigs with 2 batches a year of bacon pigs. And the other thing we do is sheep. We have 50 ewes and the lambs.
The large number of local people employed in farming indicated its importance to the livelihood of the village. Buses were the main form of transportation for the manual labourers travelling to work from in and around the village. This meant the bus stops were sited near the main employers, mostly farms. These bus stops remain at the same positions today, although the need for manual labour has gone.
Mechanisation has obviously made a big impact. My first job when I left school was to look after the horses.
Prior to this, joint tasks, like threshing the corn, built a strong community spirit.
But I have worked on the threshing machines, and you usually, whenever they went to a neighbouring farm, there was 1 or 2 of the men from that farm, from neighbouring farms, would come along and give a hand.
Many of the farming families were associated with organising village activities at their farms.
When we first came here, it was the guy used to have an annual garden fete, for the I think it was for the church, and we used to take our Dalmatian over and count the spots for a couple of bob, whatever it was. But everybody used to get involved then, to doing things just to raise money. Baking. My wife used to bake cakes, but we used to have once a year we used to have a ceilidh in the barn. Guys used to clear the barn out, and we used to have a ceilidh in there. Strip out the beans and the barn and a few drinks, and it was some wild times. Brilliant, really good nights in there.
It was in the hierarchy of farms, I would say, because the McLaren family were had quite an influence on the village. But it was always classed as a sort of one of the main farms in the village, yeah.
Today, all the farms in the village have ceased working and the sites are now housing development.
Guy Sturham's stockyard was still open when we came here, what is now Hampton Court. That was still working. You'd get the noise of the dry machines. That was still working then, so that was, when that closed, that was sort of the finish of Thorpe as a farming community.
With their demise, an age-old tradition ended. The area immediately surrounding Thorpe Thewles was a productive area for sand and gravel. Ownership of the quarries included local builders and farmers.
It was ringed with quarries, really. Thorpe.
Yes, John Hall's father had the Seaton Hills quarry.
Yeah, well, my father, he would start the quarrying in the 1930s. There was already somebody at Blakeston had a quarry on the farm, and his name was W. Barry. And then my grandfather and my father took over the quarry, which was on their own land, you see, and that's how they started.
Seaton Hills was a sand, the yellow sand. Just as you go out of Thorpe, there was a quarry there, and then when that quarry was spent, they had a plant in there, for washing the sand and gravel. They had a crusher plant in there. Then they opened a quarry the other side of the road, and it was used to be led from that quarry across the road to the plant, brought the stuff with wagons, and it was washed and graded and everything there.
Big problem I had was coal in it, in the sand. Coming out of Thorpe Teasdales and Ewells ran it at one point, and that was on Town Farm at Thorpe.
The one that was on the bank at Blakeston, just behind John's farm.
And that was the same, that was led all the way across and washed, and in the end that was finished, you know. Then it was all just closed down. Tailors of Crook had it.
Hellhole then, well the quarries were all round there.
Quarrying was an all-year-round operation employing many local people.
All the year round, and we have on our books my father had 40 men working for him.
Working in these quarries could be hard and dangerous, particularly due to the depth.
A lot of handwork then. I can remember at Seaton Hills, on the quarry face, they used to dig it out by hand.
Right.
And they used to have a couple of men on the face of the quarry, digging it out, throwing it down to the bottom, and then had an old chair-side shovel collecting it up and putting it through the screening plant. And that's why there's a lot of people employed, of course. Tremendous amount of labour intensive. The local area, there was a lot employed.
Mechanisation improved the output of the quarries and helped to make quarrying safer, taking men away from the steep quarry sides.
Where like a bucket was thrown out and it was dragged like that and then filled up. Like these quarries were worked from off the floor, you know, and then they were dug into, you know. I mean, now and again it would fall, you know. Have to be careful, like, because they would dig it in the side. The top would fall down.
Deep quarries and extensive workings could also be dangerous to local people.
I did, we weren't supposed to, but we did. Because there were very, very deep ponds. But yes, we did.
I used to go over there with the chap who used to lead the sand out. A chap called Arthur Goodman. He used to drive a wagon for Stanley Hall. And I used to ride, me and his son, a friend of mine, used to ride in the wagon with him.
Transportation of the finished product was essential for the isolated location of Thorpe Thewles.
That's how the haulage business started then, because he needed the tipper wagons to lead the sand out, and of course in those days they're not the big ones like they are today. You know, if you had a 3 or a 4 ton tipper lorry, you had a big lorry.
Quarries had a limited life and eventually closed due to exhaustion of their products. Conservation of the large quarries was undertaken.
Seaton Hills was fairly deep, and it was filled with the fly ash from the power station. The soil that was put to one side when they opened the quarry out was put back on the surface. I would think about 1958 would say the end of Seaton Hills. Blakeston quarry, it was finished quite a long time before that.
This conservation has contributed to preserving the rural beauty of Thorpe Thewles today. For many years there was a shop in the village of Thorpe Thewles.
I think the shop was probably managed by my grandma, and they also opened like a cafe upstairs, and used to sell, of course, homemade bread with Grandad's cured bacon sandwiches and all sorts of things, ice cream. Used to make their own ice cream. And in those days there seemed to be a lot of cyclists that would be passing through, you know, would be in the middle 40s, I would think.
Rose Cottage was an earlier cafe near the Three Arches.
I remember Rose Cottage. It was a black building made of timber, canvas, tarred, and I'm sure my father told me that he said that had been built for the navvies who built the railway. Cyclists were called there. Well, it was my Aunt Mary Jane, who started that off.
As in most villages, there were regular visits from travelling salesmen and the mobile shops.
Oh, there used to be travelling salesmen. I remember the Clean Easy Brush Company used to come round every now and again. The cooperative stores used to run a travelling butcher's shop. Also there used to be a mobile fish and chip shop. Used to stand on the green Well, you had all vans coming in, you know, butcher's van, greengrocers. I believe there's a fishman used to come every so often, you know. But butchers and greengrocers, they came, and coal and everything was delivered into the village. So no, you didn't have to go out.
See, during the war, Cadbury's decided to house 2 vans in this area so that they would conserve petrol, because normally they would have been travelling from Newcastle. And because there was 2 drivers and 1 more admin sort of guy that looked after all the paperwork and everything. And they stayed at our house for a few years. And they used to go up to Thorpe Station, and a train would bring in the Cadbury's chocolates and boxes and things, and they would load them into the vehicles and then go off round the local areas, Middlesbrough, Thirsk and places like that, delivering chocolate. And the caravan, the vans were garaged in Blakeston Lane. Well, at the bottom where there's a stream, it's like a little bit of a bump. And they used to take me and my sister and 1 or 2 more of the kids that were friendly in the back of the vans, and they used to delight in switching the light up in where we were and going fast over this bump. And they used to love the screams that were coming from the back, you know.
Until the introduction of modern policing methods, there was a resident village bobby.
Yeah, there was a policeman in the village.
They did a lot more in the village than ever the policeman does now, obviously, because he lived here.
The police house. And the police house in those days was at the other side of the village. You're going up the side there. And there was one house had steps up to it. The bobby lived in there. They called him, I think it was Rowan, when we were kids. And there was a couple of bobbies over the period that I can remember, lived in North Close.
Rural doctors' practices are unlike those in the town.
Did he live in the village?
No, he lived in Stillington.
Stillington.
But he came to the village twice a week. And if you needed him, you put your name down on a list at Molly's. And he would come round and visit you. And then after, as Molly got older and what have you, and the doctors changed and one thing or another, we used to leave a message at the shop. And they used to come, and then that faded out.
Blacksmithing was one of the oldest industries in the village.
It was opposite the school, below the hall. There was a little side track, and the forge was there. The blacksmith's forge was in there.
Newfall Chemical Works was situated on the road to Carlton near the railway bridge and adjacent to the station. It processed tar and stored pitch. In the last years of the 19th century, it was the scene of a major fire.
The turn of the century, Saddlers bought the place because it was on the railway, and they were in Middlesbrough, of course, big way in Middlesbrough then, and they established works there, and that's how my grandfather became the works manager. Where John Foster's house is, I was right next to that, only in my side of the hedge. The brickwork and stuff is still there, a lot of it. Newfall House was like a mini stately home, and it had 4 cottages, which is the ones, back of our cottages, which is the ones my mother lived in. But my son-in-law, Peter, has done a bit of history on the family, and I think, from what he said, like we've been there for, regardless of my grandfather doing that, my mother's side of the family have been around there for hundreds of years. So before the railway bridge was built, and that there was crossings, and her grandmother actually worked the gates. They ceased the actual chemical works for the 1918. The lads went in the war, my mother used to tell me, and then they come out, and the job was to demolish the works, poor fellow. But underneath the ground, they never filled in, and my brother and I would play, and we would go underneath at one end of the field, which is 12 acres, and come out way back at the other somewhere, and my father used to get worried and say, you know, we'll get killed and this, and my father, as I told you, used to be the nice oil man. So When he emptied all the toilets in both Carlton and Thorpe Thewles, he used to tip it in there, in those holes, and push it in and block it all up.
We had a outside toilet. So out the back door and down the path to the old type toilet. You used to take a candle when you went down there.
When I was growing up as a child in Two Wynyard Road, we used to have the toilet in the yard.
It was just a seat on a box.
You just used to use ashes and things to cover it over and newspapers to wipe your bum on and things like that.
I remember that, yeah. See, I lived there from a baby till I was 15-year-old. Never had a flush toilet.
And when I was a kid, just about every house in both Carlton and Thorpe, they had to use a nice oil man.
Mackins used to come round to clean the toilets out, yeah. I think he came every week, I think, during the day, yeah.
And the guy that came round cleaning the toilets with a spade and that had to have the right of way around the back to do so.
And part of his job was the nice soil thing. And he spread it on those fields, particularly a couple of fields which Cape House Farm, they're behind there, and that area behind Cape House Farm and where we had these other fields was, I think, considered to be out of the way, so that's where they spread biggest lot of it. There used to be some great big heaps where it had been stacked up, because you couldn't spend it, what I understand is you couldn't spread it on the field this year, so they heaped it all up and then they spread it on the field later.
For many years, an important factor in the village economy was the local garage.
Mr. Bean, it was his garage. It was Bean's garage.
We had a little wooden petrol station, and Ron Metcalf bought it, and he had it years, and he had a new one built down Wynyard Road.
It was quite small, it was just on the bend.
The garage was on the right-hand side, and there were 1 or 2 pumps for fuel, for petrol. And behind, there was a ramshackle, to me it was a ramshackled, smallish building.
Was Tony Curtis, who had the Vane Arms. He was the landlord of the Vane Arms. When he retired, he lived in the cottage at Vane Arms. He said, I'm leaving this place and I'm going to start a garage over the road. And there's no sign of it now, but it was a proper little pull-in and everything, and he had about 3 or 4 pumps on there. It'd be about late 70s, I would think.
And my grandfather, and while he lived in the shop, he started this petrol pumps up, and he had 2 or 3 pumps that you had to pump by hand, were eventually changed by a company called Finer Petroleum people, and they said to my granddad, if you sell our petrol, we'll install these pumps for you. He, at the same time, owned all the gardens now where the football field is. All that was practically his, and he used to grow all the vegetables and things and fruits, gooseberry bushes, and he'd have all kinds of things growing in that garden. And he also built a big aviary and had all different kinds of tropical birds flying around in this aviary. But around about 1946, around 47, 48, around that.
Tors's had a filling station and a little garage on the corner near the Hamilton Arms, and they had I understand they had a taxi service, yes. And Lance Faraday, I think, a gran used to talk about, if there were any emergencies, we'll go and see Lance for a taxi.
Before and even after the widespread introduction of gas, coal was delivered by train to Thorpe Thewles station, and its distribution was important to village folk.
There was a family lived in a village called Potters. I forgot about them. They actually owned what's called Blakeson Hall, and the relic of the hall was there when I was a kid. But they lived in one of them cottages along here, Billy Potter. He was a coal man for Thorpe, and he had the sidings, and he took the coal out, yeah. So he would mostly come to the house and back up to your coal house door and tip the truck, unless they did bag coal, both him and the man from Carlton, Tommy Barr, who used to get the coal from Red Marshall Station, and they would bag it, and they sold so much in bags, where people only bought a few bags.
Called him Mr. Barr, Tommy Barr they called him. He had a flat car and delivered the coal on a flat car.
When I was a kid, most people bought a lot of coal, odd bags, and mostly, like, you used to see the coal man, like Potters or Tommy, come with a horse and cart, tip it out in bulk, and then the people are shoveling the coal house. All my childhood and right up into the 60s.
The stagecoach route passed through the village of Thorpe Thewles from the early 17th century as part of the Whitby to Tynemouth service.
My father left school and he was 12 years old in 1912, obviously, and behind the Hamilton Russell there was some stables. My father's job was to change the horses, and the stagecoach came and he got the 2 or 4 horses ready for the next coach coming, and must have been, as far as I can see, the last days of a stagecoach line.
The service was rendered obsolete as the rail network expanded in the 19th century.
So by the mid-1850s you had ironworks at Stockton, Stockton Ironworks on the Malleable site, you had Norton Ironworks, a little bit later you had Carlton Ironworks, just a little way up there, and all these industries, the iron ore came from the Cleveland Hills, but they needed the coal, and the coal needed to come from Durham. They also needed limestone to help smelt the iron, and that came from County Durham as well.
Its main architectural feature was a wonderful viaduct. This took the Castle Eden branch over Thorpe Beck.
Just a very small stream to cross over and a shallow valley. They could have quite easily have put a culvert in and an embankment. The viaduct, which was 1/3 of a mile long, only cost £22 a linear foot to build, whereas you know in other areas embankments had cost £30 a linear foot. It comprised of 20 arches together, then a gap and another 3 arches. It cost £37,000 in total. The contractor was Thomas Nelson. It was open to goods traffic in 1878 and open to passengers about 2 years later.
Most of the passenger trains operated from Stockton up to Wellfield, where you could change to get a train to Sunderland or Newcastle. I don't think the passenger service would ever make a profit. I think it was just the stations were there, they had to provide us passenger service. The figures that I've got, well, the tickets issued in 1911 was 2,000 tickets issued at this station. At Carlton Station, which is the other side of Thorpe Thewles, of course, there was 13,000.
The name of the station was changed in September 1922 to Red Marshall Station to prevent confusion with other Carlton stations in the Midlands and the south of England.
There was passenger trains on it till 1931, and then it went to mainly goods. I have seen passenger trains on it. They used to use that line as a diversionary route.
Express passenger traffic was because the route provided a very good diversion when the main line was closed either for track relaying works or due to an accident.
Thorpe Thewles station, as long as I can remember, it was always just like goods trains and things like that. But we used to walk up to Red Marshall station to get the train to Stillington to the doctors.
So you used to go up there to go to Stillington when I used to go to the doctors. I used to get the little auto coach, which is like a carriage with an engine on the front. Used to be a service from Stockton to Ferryhill.
Yeah, the platform and the railway station, there was steps down off the bridge which went down onto the railway platform. And the platform started, because the bridge was a square end there, was very, very long. It went right along between our fields, then it tapered down. And on there was the railway operations room, you might call it, quite a big office and everything like that. And then the general waiting room, and there was a second class room, waiting room, and a first class waiting room. ladies' toilets, gents' toilets and things there. Or you bought your tickets to what I called the general office, a big office, and there was like a little arched window and a little hole in where you put your money through and got your ticket out. And then back over the other side, where Longlast is, there was what we used to call a warehouse, and there was a big warehouse there, and farmers used to bring corn and right until it was closed. I mean, I could never understand closing that stage because it was busy. And farmers used to bring corn and it was stored in there and then went away in trucks and things. I went to school when I was older in Holy Trinity and stuff, and all the kids used to come home with me to watch trains there. Because, like, you can go to Pickering now and see the Mallard and all these big posh trains, but they all went up and down there when we were kids. Yeah. I mean, they used to come on a weekend and train spotted.
Right. Well, the line closed, certainly for passengers and even for freight into the 1950s. There was trains running from Newcastle through Sunderland down to Liverpool and Bristol. And even into the diesel days, into the 60s, there were trains running down this line as a diversionary route if the main line was closed on a Sunday.
I remember the Queen coming to Stockton and the Royal train come up and they parked it overnight with her in it, sleeping, just the other side of the viaduct. I was there all night because I was on duty at Norton South when it came in.
Certainly round about the 1900s, Wynyard Hall was a very popular venue for the elite of the country, including the Prince of Wales, the King. They used to come regularly. It has been said that Thorpe Thewles station was one of the stations that was used to detrain the people. Wynyard station would never really be used because it was really the back door of Wynyard. This station, the road led down to the Golden Gate, the main entrance, and they say that if it came on an evening, they would light up the road with lanterns down from the station down to the main road to Wynyard.
The railway was used to transport sand and gravel from the quarries at Thorpe Thewles.
Thorpe Thewles, Wynyard and Herwithburn all had a little goods yard.
A lot of it was brought by the little lorries and horses and carts and things to the railway station and tipped into trucks and taken away. There was what we used to call the cattle dock, which was because a lot of cattle came in and out of that station as well. But they used the same dock and the trucks came alongside. I think they came from Ireland, the cattle. They'd been coming from Ireland, and then they used to come into what we call the cattle docks, and there was pens there as well. And they were taken out, so put in the pens, and farmers and things used to come and drive them away. My brother was a bit older than me, and a couple of times he went with what they called the drovers, the men who drove the cattle. Well, we used to be, I think people used to employ them to drive the cattle. My brother used to nick off school and go with the drovers. Thorpe station. It was never really used in my time. I think it was still used a bit for goods traffic in my very early childhood. Where we lived at Redmaster Station, the station master there was responsible for Thorpe Station, Wynyard Station and Herwithburn Station. And 2 days a week he went in a taxi, the Lance who had the garage had the taxi, and he used to go round these stations because the line was still busy. We as kids, me and my younger sister, if we were off school, we used to go with him.
A perk of the station master's post was the rights to the coal staiths.
At this end of the station, now, as you used to go in, and the station was there, and then all the coal sidings were huge, right down that side, yeah. The trucks went on the top, just opened the bottom door of the truck and it fell into the horse and cart. And then they shut it again, there were like coppers on the trucks.
The Thornaby to Shildon line passing through Carlton Station was electrified in the early 20th century as part of the electrification of the East Coast Main Line. There was an official inquiry resulting from a serious accident in December 1922. Near Carlton Station, an electric locomotive lost control of a coal train and overran its signal, then collided with another train. Accidents, although infrequent, made long-lasting impressions on the villagers.
There was more crashes up and down that line, and then I think there was in all the rest of the British Isles. We come home from school and there was a crash somewhere along, mainly between where we lived at Marshall Station and sort of Witten Bridge in that area. A passion for crane. And so my first thing I did was get my old school clothes off, my uniform, my old gear on, to go and see the railway cranes after crashes but there was a lot of crashes. And there was once, our house was opposite Long Last and the trains went round it. And I come home from school one day and the train had fell off the line out the front of the house. And my mother was in the house, scared to death, and there we were. And I remember coming home and I had all the machinery, putting the crane on, the train back on the line. And
one morning I heard this train coming down and this engine was blowing his whistle like mad. And some cattle had got on the line and he caught them up on the viaduct, killed one or two of them.
Right.
Because my father had to go and help to clean it up because they were McLarens.
Right.
I used to keep a lot of cattle. The cattle got on there, that was the last time for me. And several got, you know, one got his head chopped off, other one got broken legs and things like that. But it was quite a thing, more so in the days of the steam trains and things when we were kids, that like my father would have the odd one, or then he'd come in and say Swinbanks up here had had some killed, or Cape House Farm. Yeah, there was quite a lot of cattle got killed on the line.
The viaduct held a great fascination for many of the local children.
The viaduct, playing on it. The lady out the village worked in the signal box, but she only worked part-time, so if she wasn't there you could get past quite easy. If not, you just went round the fields at Cape House Farm and over onto the viaducts to live. We played on the 20 arches and we played, and then in my teens we used to shoot rabbits all around it. It was absolutely a mass with rabbits. And then of course the railways were closed in the 60s and you go and see them deteriorating. And then I remember, and when they knocked them down, all these porter cabins and offices had all been erected in the field up at Newfall, and that was where the headquarters were while they knocked them down.
In the 1970s, plans for the creation of the Castle Eden Walkway took the route across the viaduct, but these were changed due to safety concerns and high maintenance costs. Despite much opposition, its fate was sealed. The 3 arches were demolished in April 1979, and raffle tickets were sold for the honour of pressing the plunger to demolish the 20 arches, with the money going to charity. On the 3rd of June the same year, 10,000 people turned out to watch the explosion. Another important transport link was the rural bus service.
And in the 1920s, after the First World War, there was a lot of soldiers came back and bought old army wagons, converted them into buses or charabancs and started a bus service. And you can imagine if there was a bus service, as there was from Stockton to Durham, through Thorpe Thewles village, right through the centre of the village, it was much easier to jump on a bus.
There was a bus stop where the underpass is now to go into John Hall's farm. The drive came out onto the main road in them days, from Middlefield Farm, was onto Durham Road, and at that corner was the bus. And John's father, you see, employed a lot of men. He had a big business there with the quarries and the haulage and everything. And people didn't have cars, did they? And you used to see the drivers and the people all getting on the bus to go home. On the morning you see them all coming.
Buses in those days, and buses, one every 10 minutes, once over.
There's 5 buses altogether in the hour. There was a 38, Durham to Middlesbrough, 55, Middlesbrough to Newcastle, and there was the Wilkinsons, a big bus company, coach company from Sedgefield, and then there was the favourite direct from Bishop Auckland to Stockton, and the favourite number 2, Bishop to Stockton.
There used to be another bus that used to go Wolverton way. And it used to be called Swinbanks.
Yeah, Mighty Atta. The Mighty Atta get out and push. And it used to stop, you know, the big church in the centre of Stockton, where the library is now. It used to pull up on the side there. It wasn't allowed to go in the high street like Wilkinson's did.
There used to be a bus service came on Wednesdays and Saturdays only. When it was a little bus, one of these about, what, 25-seater type things, you know. The driver got to know who we would pick up on the way. So that even if you were a bit late for the bus would be waiting for you. You know, it was a friendly service. Not like it is now.
We used to go swimming, so we used to walk at the bus into Stockton. Then we used to walk from Stockton over Thornaby Bridge to the baths and then back again.
Vickers Bridge on the road from Carlton was the scene of a dramatic accident.
We were in the late 40s. It was a Bluebird coaches, and I think it had been out with a woman's trip, and it came down the road from Carlton, and they missed the turn at the bridge.
Vickers Bridge they call it. Yeah. The bus come down, smashed through the cast iron fence and sat on the tree. I think there was 2 or 3 old ladies hurt. But I always thought it was such a pity they never did it metal again. Because one half was stone and one half was metal for a lot of years. It was cast iron at each side, and it was the most beautiful little bridge.
The 2 world wars have had a great impact on Thorpe Thewles. During the Great War, many men volunteered to serve their country. Some of them made the ultimate sacrifice and never returned. Those who did return found that the war had made a great impact on their lives and the lives of those around them. Friendships forged in the trenches remained strong, especially for one man who invited his Maori friend Peter King to visit. He became his brother-in-law and stayed for much longer than expected. During both wars, Thorpe Thewles became home to the evacuees seeking a refuge from the bombing. However, during the Second World War, the village was not as safe as it had been assumed. Again, the men of the village, including the vicar, joined the armed forces. Those who remained at home served as special constables, ARP wardens, or joined the Home Guard. Many young women from Thorpe joined the ATS, serving as drivers and manning anti-aircraft batteries throughout Britain. Even today, nearly 65 years after the end of the war, the landscape around Thorpe Thewles still contains many subtle reminders of this dramatic period in British history.
Very vague recollections of sitting there in the pews and the pulpit was slightly higher and the vicar announcing that we're actually at war. And that must have been a Sunday morning.
And came over the wireless that war had been declared, and that was when we knew about it, and my father said, oh well, we know what we're in for now. Yeah.
Within weeks of the outbreak of the Second World War, Thorpe received its first evacuees, 25 children from St Patrick's Roman Catholic School in Sunderland.
And my mother was the officer in charge of the evacuees that came.
And they came from the Sunderland area, you know, but everybody that had room to take them, they couldn't refuse, they had to take them, you know, so there was 1 or 2 billeted in manor cottages.
But they were good kids and they integrated with us and everything.
To us they were just some more bands to play with, really.
Quite a few Catholics in them, because it was a Church of England school. So being a Church of England school, we were quite intrigued with these Catholics that came, because we'd never heard of Catholics.
Later, others arrived from London and the industrial areas of Teesside.
At the end of the railway house, which is now Longlast, at the end house there's a family called Tinklers, and they had a family called Featonbys who lived with them, who'd come from London, evacuated from London.
From late 1939, preparations began for the expected enemy air raids.
There was an issue of Anderson shelters.
This thing arrived one day, my dad and Harry Turnbull, and they dug this pit fairly close to the front door, and it took a couple of days to dig, and then they put these corrugated iron sheets up, and then they got all these soil and the earth that they dug out and put it on top, and it had a little doorway in the front, and we were supposed to go in there, but the next morning when we'd finished it and went down, and he opened the door and he shouted, "It's full of water." And it was full of water.
The most deluxe air raid shelter that anybody ever had. It was under the ground, it was nearly as big as this room, and it was behind the house that's there now, Long Last. And as us as kids, after the war was over, it was what we would call our gamut. And all the kids from Thorpe and everywhere used to come, and we were always in this big air raid shelter.
That was in the front room. It was about bigger than a double bed, and it was just like a big rabbit hutch. We had a metal top, and there was like angle irons on the corners, and then like a mesh round, and at one end there was a door. When the siren used to go, all the youngers used to get in, yeah? Mother also used to get in. My dad wouldn't go in. He liked to know what was going on, stand at the front door.
We just used to hide under the stairs when Father said so.
My mum used to take me and my sister under the stairs because they reckon that most houses that were bombed, the stairs were left standing.
A lot of us just packed in, crammed, till it was all over, till you heard the sirens blow.
They were in the air raid shelter and there was just thumping and thumping all night, and my father was out on home guard duty, and next morning they said, "Bah, you must have had a lot of bombs dropping during the night." And no, it's been a quiet night, and it turned out the cart horse had got on top of the air raid shelter and was walking round and round.
The school was an air raid shelter, yeah.
Like an Anderson shelter in this end of the yard.
I only remember going in it once, and I do distinctly remember going down the steps into it.
A couple of times the ladies, you know, the two schoolmistresses got us out and took us all into it. There was maybe, in that school, 20, 30 kids in that school when I went, and you were all huddled in this little place, and so you did get frightened.
We used to sometimes accumulate in the cellar of the Hamilton Russell Arms pub, and they had like little camp beds for air raid shelters. There was one built on the village top, and it was a brick building with like a blast wall built in front of it, and it was like 3 separate door compartments with like a form in, and it would hold probably about maybe 6 people comfortably, and each compartment had like a square hole in the wall so that if you couldn't get out of York, you could crawl through into the next compartment. But where the air raid shelter was, at the top of the village, they had this wooden post with a slanted wooden board on it, and it was painted a colour, green I think it was, and that was to tell you if it changed colour, get your gas masks on because there was gas about. But I said to Paul, and I had a laugh at this the other day, I couldn't see people running out the house every part of the day looking to see if it changed colour.
In the early years of the war, the threat of poison gas attacks was a very real fear. In the village school, the ARP wardens regularly drilled the local children in the use of their masks.
To be able to get it on very quickly.
Not that we ever did, and we never needed to.
Gas mask was the most dreadful thing, but you had to take your gas on everywhere you went.
Everybody had, I think you had to, and if you didn't, I think an air raid ARP wardens, I think they could ask you, where's your gas mask?
During the war, Thorpe was served by a village policeman plus volunteer air raid wardens who ensured that the blackout was maintained after dark and that everyone carried their government-issued gas masks with them at all times.
My father was an ARP man.
Go around and make sure that your curtains weren't showing any light.
Well, my mother used to put the blackout up every night at the windows. We only had paraffin lamps, so it would never be very bright.
It was like horsehair, like a black material which is all, fibrous.
And sometimes the bobby would come, knock on the door, and tell her, my mother, you can see a bit of light at the corner of the black curtains.
And most people had the windows kind of taped up with sticky tape because if they got fragmented, the glass wouldn't shatter,
From May 1940, the threat of a German invasion was very real, and a series of anti-invasion defences were rapidly installed along Britain's coast. In Teesside, the line of the Castle Eden branch line, whose cuttings and embankments offered a natural anti-tank obstacle, marked a reserve stop line from where the defending military were to fall back to in the event of the Germans ever gaining control of Teesside's coast. At all strategic crossings and road junctions along this railway line, the Army built a series of concrete roadblocks and defensive pillboxes.
One day there was a big tractor came to the farm who was there to plough big furrows across the field. He was ploughing with this great big, it must have been a big plough, you know, and turning the whole furrow to dig these trenches, which he said was to stop the aeroplanes landing. But also in the next field, the whole gang of fellas arrived one day and they put, what, for want of a better word, telegraph poles up.
You know, so that, but they were obviously erected in such a way, a glider trying to land would have had its wings knocked off, and anybody in it would have been either severely injured or it was obviously nobody was going to try and land a glider on that. It was obvious that's what it was done for.
In May 1940, the government formed the Home Guard to bolster Britain's meagre defences. Stanley Hall of Middlefield Farm was appointed the lieutenant of the 20 to 30 man strong Thorpe Thewles Home Guard.
When I was 16, I told them I was 17 at Thorpe Thewles. 2 or 3 of us did, like, yeah. But I think they knew, because they put us on like first aid duties, learning first aid and that sort of stuff for a year.
Come back and he came back one day in this khaki uniform looking like a soldier, and he had a gun and some shiny bullets, which probably 303s like that now, but he'd been allocated this gun, you know.
Prior to that, apparently he'd had a piece of wood, you know, in a issued with about 5 rounds of ammunition. How long that would have lasted in an invasion, I don't know, but at least I suppose it gave them some confidence probably to face the enemy.
He brought his gun home and he used to have a bayonet which we used to fascinate us that went on the top of the gun. Or we would play with his tin hat on and things like that.
Well, it would have been a massacre if there had been an invasion, I'm sure.
Why?
Because they weren't that good soldiers, were they really? When they all got together, these farmlands, all the top of it was farming. In the morning, we always went on a Sunday morning every week in Thorpe Thewles. We had manoeuvres, you know, you're supposed to go out in manoeuvres and that. One day I became a lance corporal, and I was taken about half a mile from Thorpe with 2 men, and went into Thorpe without being seen. So the rest of the men were all looking out for us. But what I did, I said to these 2 men, you go that way. We never thought we'd split up like. 2 went that way, they got captured, and I went that way and walked straight in.
And they were called out. Yes, sometimes they went out on patrols because there was a lot of bombing went on the railway, you know.
We should do guard duty. Before I got to Thorpe on the Durham Road, say about half a mile before I got to Thorpe, there was a farm, and there was like a hen house. And 2 of us used to be there every night. Supposed to be doing what we were supposed to be guarding, God knows. About manoeuvres, there was this hut in these woods near Thorpe, and there was supposed to be some enemy in this hut. We had to get as near as possible without them spotting us. We were crawling behind the trees. This old faucet was smoked. You got within the yard of this hut, and it lit up. It was hell on. We once played football against Coyote Camp. Thorpe Home Guard, we got well stuffed because they were 10 times fitter than us. That was the only time I remember playing football. I was in goal.
Thorpe Thewles Scout Troop were also invited to support the war effort by acting as messenger boys for the Home Guard.
That the Scouts might be able to be messengers for the Home Guard. I know my dad was dead again it, you know, so that I thought that knocks my chances on the head, you know, so that he said no, he said these boys want to be, they don't want to be Hitler youth, you know, and so that I think that squashed it for me.
Other local scout troops were also to play their part in the event of the German invasion, as here recalled by the friend of a Fairfield scout.
He's often told the tale that he was in the Scouts, and part of his duty was if the Germans ever landed nearby, he had to run up the railway line and inform the people who were looking after or guarding the viaduct that the Germans were coming.
In 1940, bands of secret resistance fighters were established to fight back in the event that the Germans ever took control of Britain's coastal regions. These special forces were recruited locally from within the Home Guard and operated in small teams from hidden underground bunkers. The nearest of these bunkers to Thorpe were located in Wynyard Parkland at Bishopton.
I've heard since that my Uncle Arthur was part of a special squad. I understood that he was a war reserve policeman. But it's just very interesting since I've met you. I've learned that he's been on this resistance squad. Never mentioned that.
In addition to the Home Guard, Teesside was defended by detachments of the regular army. One such detachment was based at Wynyard Hall.
There were army in Wynyard Park.
I can remember Bren gun carriers coming up Wynyard Road.
And we had 2 soldiers, but they used to come over regularly to help us. And particularly at times like harvest and things like that. And they were good workers.
And the damage that they did in Wynyard Hall was absolutely amazing. The beautiful marble fireplaces that had just had buckets of coal just chucked on them, and were all, Wynyard was in a shocking state when the army left.
A military transport depot and central ammunition dump was located in the buildings now occupied by Dewsons, opposite the Horse and Jockey Public House, supplying ammunition to the gun batteries throughout the area. The largest of these gun emplacements was located in the southeast of Thorpe Thewles, just outside Kyora Hall, in what is now the Roseworth area.
There were barrage balloons over what's probably Billingham now, you know, and I remember the soldiers at Kyora Hall, for example. I'd seen those coming home on the bus, and I certainly remember the guns. And the one my mother used to call Big Bertha.
When my mother heard that going, she was on a high. So as she heard the guns, literally the temperature just went down. And I'm sure I used to hear her say, Big Bertha's on the go.
You could always tell Kyora guns because they were louder than the others.
When the 4.5 calibre guns at Kyora fired in unison, they could be heard for miles. On occasion, the resulting vibrations were known to cause structural damage to local homes.
When the guns you got all the soot down and it went over everything.
I was in 6th Junction, I was at the secondary school, so I went in my parents' bedroom to do my homework on their dressing table. My homework come down, there was a really big crash. And half the ceiling, a great big piece of the ceiling had come out. And it must have been made of good stuff in those days. And it landed on this dressing table where I was sat. It would have felled me right on the head if it come down like. And any little ornaments on the dressing table, they were all smashed to smithereens. Well, if there was a raid on, we were probably outside on the road, so we could see them firing and shout, "Fire!"
So you'd see the flashes.
One sort of was manned by a load of Irishmen from Northern Ireland, so they say, and there'd been a big raid on Belfast. Well, these Irish hunters, not as hunters. Because on account of this raid, and the next raid, there was all hell let loose and they were firing at these German planes. Whether they hit anything, I don't know.
We used to put the searchlights on from Kyora, big rays of light, and we used to watch and watch.
And all the searchlights beamed in on this one plane, and you could see this little white dot.
And you could hear boom, boom, boom from Kyora.
It was like bonfire night every night, you know. You don't realise until you think about it just how serious it was.
There was the additional danger of falling shrapnel from the exploding shells fired from the guns at Kyora.
There was a smell in the air and there was shrapnel all over how everyone, and I think we had one cow killed with shrapnel, but...
We'd had the all clear, so the teacher come and said, right, get yourselves home as quick as you can. And we were halfway up the bank, and we heard the guns going off at Kyora, so there must have been some late planes going over, and they were having a crack at them. And that's when I nearly got hit with a piece of shrapnel. Fell out there, we just heard it hit the floor on the road, and it just rattled. It was a piece about, it would have hurt you if it did hit you. It was about 3.5 inches long, and about 1.5 inches the other way. And it was run out, you know, because it'd been raining, steam was coming off and they had to touch it. Yeah.
After the fall of France in the summer of 1940, German air raids started in earnest. The heavy industry of Teesside was one of their prime targets, and now no one was safe, not even in the outlying villages.
But we never gave it a thought that we would get bombed ourselves, because we were just, as I say, so isolated. It seemed impossible that they would drop any bombs near us. And I think that's what made us feel so safe.
A lot of bombs were dropped round here when you come to think of it.
We're probably trying to hit the railway, because that was an essential railway at that time, you know, for feeding the stuff they wanted to the ICI, to Dorman and Longs.
And there were bomb craters that I saw along the sides of the line, quite a bit going up towards Stillington and that way. Yeah. And there was a bombing had gone through my bridge, and we used to see the bomb when we were kids. The bomb had come, gone through the bridge, and it was wedged in, and whoever disposed of people of it must have taken a guts out, and the bomb was there. And
the night that they got ICI, and it was just like daylight, my father said, his words were, "If Jerry comes back tonight, we've all had it." I can remember, and that to a small child was very, very frightening.
The most notable damage caused by enemy bombs around Thorpe occurred in the evening of Tuesday the 21st of October 1941, when a stick of 500 kilogram high explosive bombs were dropped between Thorpe Thewles Station and Wynyard Park. One of these bombs scored a near direct hit on a cottage just northwest of Thorpe Farm.
I'd gone to bed, and the gun started at Kyora Hall, and my mother got me up, and we heard this aeroplane.
And there's just suddenly a great whoosh.
Not a bang, but a crump.
The world just seemed to go berserk.
And the blackout curtain, or whatever it is, went hurtling past me and knocked me off the onto the couch where my mother was.
My dad said, "Are you all right?" No, that was my first thing I remember, my dad voice saying, "Are you all right?"
The oil lamp had gone on the floor, and I remember my dad getting the clippy mat, and it was burning, and he rolled it up, and he pushed it like that up the fire back.
There'd been this pressure wave, which was obviously the blast, and then a sort of a reactionary pressure wave, which was obviously the suction back from the bomb.
My mother tells me the story, but I don't remember it, of the front door going through the back door.
That must have soot and muck and goodness only knows what from down the chimney and everywhere.
And I don't remember much more about that, except getting carried down the field in a blanket, which is about half a mile down to Thorpe Farm.
Well, everything was debris everywhere. You know, all this stuff went on the windows and whatnot. It obviously worked. There was a certain amount of broken glass, but what all this stuff had done, it had stopped it flying.
And I understand that the front of the roof had lifted, and all the tiles were off the front of the house. But there was a very large hole in the front garden, about 20 feet across.
When we went up the following day to have a look to see how bad things were, embedded into that wall was the biggest piece of shrapnel off the bomb that had whizzed between all of us, could have taken any of our heads off, and yet there wasn't one of us injured. Now, to me, that was a miracle.
As the war progressed, Britain began to take the fight back to Germany via missions flying out of the Bomber Command airfields.
But on a night, when they were going to Germany, all the planes came from Goosepool, which is now near the aerodrome, and all the planes circled. And that is to get the height, see, they were fully loaded with the bombs, and had to get the height before they set off for Germany.
During 1941 or 42, one Allied bomber crash-landed in a field just northwest of Thorpe Thewles.
We were under the stairs in our house, and we could hear this plane. You could tell it was in difficulty.
Next thing I'd heard, it had crashed over the field.
Burst into flames.
Next day we went up to see, you know.
Going with my brother and seeing it, and we sort of pinched bits of the aircraft glass and things.
Word got around that it had crashed, and that these pilots had got badly burnt and were throwing themselves into the beck to put the fire out.
The injured crew from the Thorpe plane crash were treated in a military hospital in Sedgefield. This same hospital served many of the wounded soldiers.
After D-Day, there was loads of trains came through Thorpe Thewles to Winniard Station.
Yeah, the big Red Cross on the side.
With injured soldiers now, because they were, in those days when you were injured you wore like a blue suit and like a red tie. And
they'd get off at Winniard Station and either go to Sedgefield Hospital or the Winniard Hall.
Right. With increasing numbers of men entering the armed forces, gaps were left in both industry and on the land that had to be filled by women. In the area around Thorpe Thewles, this was most notable by the presence of land army girls.
I seem to recollect 2 land girls working on the land that term.
They lived in hostels in Wolverston. They had their own vehicle and one of the girls used to drive them. Agnes used to be the driver. Remember Agnes? They were from Tyneside really.
As the tide of war changed in Britain's favour, prisoners of war were taken in ever-increasing numbers. Many of these prisoners were held in local POW camps.
You know, prisoners of war, because there was quite a few prisoners of war on the farms around here. And I used to wear slippers made by the prisoners of war.
The first ones that I know of that came were Italian.
And they worked for McLaren's farm, and they worked at Hall's farm at Carlton and Swinbank.
And then Germans came as well.
Ex-German prisoner who lived with us. And he used to come across to the Kai or the was a German prisoner of war camp. That was his headquarters. He had to go back there to get his cake. And he used to get a big slice of his fruit cake, absolutely delicious. It was like army rations, you know. Of course you never got currents or nothing like that during the war. And it was just a ticket, you know. I mean, we got stuck into it as well because he didn't need it all himself.
They used to come with the warders.
They used to cycle around to the farm, do a day's work and then cycle back, and then eventually they used to live in loose boxes that the cattle or horses would be in, and they used to put beds in.
And with my grandma having the shop, they used to go in there. I mean, they were free to walk around, you know.
Dad used to get herrings, pickled herrings for them, and they were allowed one lot of cigarettes a week.
One of them was off a German submarine, and they called him Rudy.
We had one called Fritz, who was a lovely man.
I mean, they were spot on people, like, you know.
At the end of the war, Dad kept 2 of them on.
On Christmas Eve 1944, the only V1 flying bomb to appear over Teesside flew over Wynyard Park to the east of Thorpe Thewles, where it was seen and heard by several locals.
The flying bomb came over, wasn't it?
I saw it go across.
It was about 7:30 in the morning, I think it was.
I actually saw the flickering of the...
But it landed on the cricket field anymore, so it didn't do much damage.
The end of the war was marked by public holidays with national and local celebrations.
That I was in school and the school ma'am told us that, you know, Mr. Church had been on the wireless or something and the war was ended. My father and mother put up a huge stage in the railway waiting room, which was fairly big. And we had concerts and parties, I think, for days.
There were further family celebrations thereafter on the return of serving military personnel to the village, some of whom had been away from home for over 4 years.
I couldn't wait for my dad to get home, like. I had a few folks, kids used to say, your dad's come home, and he used to tear down. And he wasn't him, like, you know. Kidding me, you know.
Huge celebrations when the war was won, and VE Day we used to call, wasn't it? That's it, yeah. Fantastic.
The making of the DVD would not have been possible without the support of Awards for All and all those who came forward in response to appeals by the Thorpe Thewles History Group for volunteers to share their memories with us. Our researchers produced a large archive of material which is available from the history group in the village.